Hi, and welcome to hippoBrain. Here is where we have hippo-sized conversations with people with hippo-sized brains. It's just amazing number of conversations we've had. We've had this variety of conversations, and where we started and where we are today, the kind of conversations we've had with various different people, we've enjoyed them a lot. We hope you have enjoyed them. Today we have a very interesting person. She's done a PhD on something I'm not going to tell you yet, but we'll definitely ask her about it, because I never even understood that one could do a PhD on that topic. But it is extremely interesting. Rajesh, over to you to introduce our next guest.
Hi everyone, welcome to hippoBrain. Our guest today is Shruti Rajagopalan. So I heard Shruti for the first time many years ago speak about the topic of her constitution. I said it.
It is, yes, you're right. The topic of a PhD, which is the Indian Constitution. Rajesh, you let it out of the bag, but go ahead.
And there's probably no one else, I think, who knows it as well as Shruti, and we'll talk to her about that. But more interestingly, let me tell you first about her. Shruti is Senior Research Fellow at the Mercatus Center just outside Washington. She leads the Indian Political Economy Research and Emergent Ventures India. We'll talk about that later. At Mercatus, she was an Associate Professor of Economics at Purchase College, State University of New York. She got a PhD in economics from George Mason in 2013. And she has a fantastic podcast, Ideas of India. Again, long form conversations, fantastic stuff. And I have to say one thing I meet Shruti every few months and we have fantastic conversations. And I have no doubt that this is going to be one of them. Welcome to hippoBrain, Shruti.
Thank you, Rajesh. As you mentioned, I can't remember ever having an interaction with you that I didn't enjoy a lot, that I didn't take lots of insights from. And one interesting thing about me and Rajesh is we both always show up with like a really fat notebook, and we both are constantly taking notes from each other's, whatever we get from each other's point of view. And, I've thought a lot about the way Rajesh looks at the world and, really learned a lot from it. So thank you for having me.
Just a point there. I also joined the gang. I always roam around with a big fat notebook. I am in hippoBrain company. I will try to be even a little bit like you guys. Rajesh, your first question.
So Shruti, it'd be great to start with your personal journey. So from Delhi University, PhD, New York, Washington, walk us through those years.
Yeah, happy to. So Rajesh, I was born in the 80s and, I've seen India pre-liberalization. I remember the liberalization moment quite clearly, but I had no sense that I would be an economist. I didn't even know such a discipline existed. My family was journalists. My dad worked for a public sector bank. My mother is a renowned, Carnatic classical veena player. And I grew up wanting to be a lawyer. So I had nothing to do with economics. But of course, if you live in India and you have your eyes and ears even slightly open, you see a lot of things around you. So, some of the things that are just easy to observe are things like poverty and corruption and, just like so many shortages I grew up with, my grandmother wanting to go early to the ration shop to make sure that you get sugar, or, the kind of adulteration we talk about, my nani removing all the kankar from the dal. These are some classic 80s things, which I know most of India today doesn't remember or has never experienced. So that was my limited, interaction with economics or markets. And the nicest thing about liberalization was, now you could drink Pepsi or, you could get like Kit Kat or 3 more chocolates than we had in socialism, something like that. I wanted to be a lawyer. So, when I finished my 12th standard, luckily I got good enough grades to go to Delhi University. And then there was a question of what do you study before, one does law? And I picked economics and, I got into Hansraj College. And that is, I think, the turning point of my life. I had some just incredible professors. And, you and I have discussed this before. Once you see the world from the economic point of view, it is very difficult to look at it any other way or to ignore it. And, I must mention Professor Anil Kukradi, who taught me, principles, micro, intermediate, micro, just a remarkable professor. He retired last year. Just, this amazing person who got students engaged, big influence on my life. I learned public finance from Alka Kakkar. We'd go for the occasional lecture to Delhi School of Economics. So that was sort of, the economics background I had, but I very much wanted to go to law school, and I did go to law school, to the Faculty of Law in Delhi. And that's when I realized that, I am not cut out for law. And the reason is that once you're wired as an economist, it's very difficult to unwire that. And what I mean by that is that law does not have an analytical framework. It's a normative discipline, right? You can make arguments from different points of view. You can represent all points of view. Economics, on the other hand, has very core set of assumptions that we make about how the world is and how human beings behave. Right? So we assume that one of the important things the world is dictated by is scarcity. And what I mean by scarcity is not shortage. I just mean everything is scarce, everything is limited, right? There is always some alternative use that one could put to, whether it is food, whether it is money, whether it is your time, whether it is your mental attention. So whether you're the richest person in the world or, the smartest person in the world, it doesn't matter. The scarcity constraint applies to everybody, although on a different margin. So, economics comes with this fundamental assumption. The resources are scarce. The world is dictated by the kind of trade-offs people make. And now that we're coming to the most important part of economics, which is people, the question is, how do people behave? Right? And we all know the fundamental assumption of economics is that people behave in a self-interested manner. And by that, I don't mean they are jerks or they are greedy or they are terrible. I just mean in any kind of exchange or any kind of interaction, people usually think of themselves first, right? That's the assumption of economics. So now you have these basic tools that all economists agree upon, that this is how the world works. And then from this, you see how people interact and what kind of outcomes we generate more generally in the market, right? What kind of patterns emerge. So if people start trading when they're self-interested, they want to do best for themselves, what kind of price emerges, or what kind of, chocolates you get in the marketplace, or do you get Pepsi or do you not get Pepsi, right? Those sorts of things. And that was really fascinating. But on the other hand, I had this grounding in law, and I figured out that to make sure that you get lots and lots of chocolates as opposed to one chocolate, that is not just determined by the market, it is also determined by the institutions within which markets exist, right? So whether I need to rely on my uncle who came from the United States and brought chocolates in duty-free markets, right? Or whether I could just go to the local Kirana shop and get my chocolates, that was dictated by something other than markets. And that is the government, right? That is the role of institutions. And that is the part which I think I cracked when I was in law school. I understood how important the institutional structure is, which allows different kinds of interventions in the market, and what that means. Sometimes the interventions do good, and most of the times the interventions are quite bad, right? They lead to terrible unintended consequences. And then I decided that, I want to really understand the institutional and regulatory structure. One of the best places to do that in the world was George Mason University. I actually am one of those weird people who apply to one PhD program. I didn't know you're supposed to apply to many. I did, this basic Google search after I read The Calculus of Consent by Gordon Tullock and James Buchanan. I looked them up, and this is the early stages of the internet when, the universities have just put up profiles or photographs of their faculty, but you don't know too much beyond that. We're still in a world of paper applications. So I found that, Gordon Tullock is at the law school at George Mason, James Buchanan's at the economics department. And I said, this is probably what I want to do. And, there were some very important people instrumental along the way, like Parth Shah at the Center for Civil Society, who introduced me to, the writings of Buchanan and Hayek and Milton Friedman and so on. And, once I came to George Mason, of course, I've had some incredible mentors. You met some of them. Professor Peter Betke was one of my advisors, Richard Wagner. I work with Tyler Cowan, who heads the Mercatus Center, Alex Tabarrok, who's been my teacher and now co-author. So, just a wonderful set of people and mentors. I went for a fellowship to NYU, and, I got to know Professor Mario Rizzo and Richard Epstein there. And Richard calls me, the bad penny that doesn't go away. So, it was one of those things. I went there as a fellow during my PhD, and because I got a job in New York, I just kind of stayed on as a fellow, and I continued writing with them and working with the center. And last year, around this time, I came back to George Mason University after teaching for many years at SUNY because, Tyler Cowan and other people at Mercatus were interested in exploring, political economy research in India. And that's really what I'm doing now. And I'm happy to talk more about what that means later, but this is, my intellectual journey in short.
Oh, fantastic, Shruti. But let's probe a little deeper on the one topic to begin with, because that will satiate Jemit's curiosity. is your PhD on the Indian Constitution. Tell us a little about that.
Yeah, so, in economics, one of the things we assume is that the rules of the game are given and fixed, right? So the institutional environment within which people exist and within which people trade, that is given and fixed. And then, people have their various strategies. Sometimes those strategies are just market behavior, which is, how am I buying, selling, producing, my entrepreneurial actions and so on. And sometimes it's also non-market behavior, like political behavior, right? Am I going to bribe government officials? Am I going to try and get licenses or privileges or special monopoly rights and so on? But we usually take the institutional environment as given and fixed, right? Now, I wanted to challenge that. So I'm not the first person to challenge that. There is a long list of exceptional economists who've talked about what we call endogenizing the institutional rules or endogenizing the constitutional rules. What we mean by that is not only are our strategies within the marketplace or in our political behavior, going to change with the circumstances, the rules can also change with the circumstances. So I try to understand what enables constitutional rules to change, or what is the reason people are trying to change constitutional rules. And this is, I'll give you the Cliff Notes version of what I found. When you have a very strong set of constitutional rules that prevent, rent seeking, privilege seeking, and this kind of crony behavior that you see, when politics and markets interact, there are various constitutional rules that try to prevent that, okay? Now, if the gains are large enough, all these political entrepreneurs will then try and change the constitutional rules such that they can then do all the, wheeling and dealing that they want. So let me give you an example of this, okay? So in 1950, when India got independent, and, in 50, when it became a republic, one of the major things on the agenda was land reform. Okay. And some of this was understandable because, India was an incredibly poor country. 95% of the people were working in agriculture. Most of them were not landowners, right? Only 1 or 2% of the people who were working in agriculture actually owned all the land. So there was a push towards making this a more equitable system, especially because, a lot of this land had been granted to zamindars by, privileges from the East India Company and the Crown. So the intention was very noble, but the actions that finally brought this to bear was all the parliamentarians needed to fight elections. And one of the election promises they made was that they're going to redistribute land from rich zamindars to poor people. But the constitution prevented them from doing that without giving compensation. Because the constitutional rule is we need to treat everybody as equal. It doesn't matter if you're a peasant or if you're a zamindar. And if we take land, whoever one takes land or property from, they must be fairly compensated. That is the constitutional requirement under the original Article 31. But that obviously wasn't going to work because the Indian government didn't have money to compensate all the zamindars, right? And if you compensate the zamindars for taking the land, then the whole point is moot anyway. So the first thing that the Indian parliamentarians did, and a lot of state legislators were pushing for this. And here there's no right-wing, left-wing thing going on. I mean, GB Pant is one of the more right-wing, people in the Indian National Congress at the time. But even he wanted land reforms in Uttar Pradesh, of which he was a chief minister, right? So, and you have really left-wing people who want the same thing. So this was past ideology. This was just a question of we made an election promise, and if we want to run a democratic state, then we can't have a revolution. We need to do this. So the way out was they amended the constitution and they created something incredible. It's a very unique provision. I haven't seen it in any other constitution. It's called the 9th schedule. It was at the back of the constitution that they attached it. This is under Article 31B. And it said anyone, any statute that is added to the 9th schedule is completely protected from judicial review, even if it violates the fundamental rights. And what that means is we can now pass statutes where we take land from rich zamindars, give it to the poor people. We need not compensate the rich zamindars fairly and equally to the poorer landowners. And if the court shuts it down because it's enforcing the constitution, doesn't matter. The court is completely prevented or, nullified from intervening in this fashion. And these statutes are completely protected, right? So this is one example. Now, what are the sorts of things that went in the 9th schedule? It wasn't just land reform. It's also your monopoly restrictions, right? It is your FERA Act, right? Your foreign exchange restrictions. It is MRTP. It is nationalization of all your coal mines and copper mines and general insurance. It's bank nationalization. It's everything in the kitchen sink, right? So once we have this kind of relaxation of constitutional rules, it becomes very easy for political entrepreneurs and cronies to find gaps in the constitution such that they can benefit themselves politically at the cost of other people. Right? And this has nothing to do with ideology. I don't think it has much to do with intentions. It has to do with costs and benefits, which are imposed by constitutional constraints or the relaxation of constitutional rules. So this is the sort of, work I was doing during my PhD. I can, if you have notes, then I can send some of these papers along.
This is very interesting, Shruti, and I'm as layman. I'm as lame as a layman can be. But this, to my mind, is very serious. In many ways, I don't know, just tell me if I'm right or wrong. You take a constitution because it's supposed to protect my fundamental rights. And in that, you create a hole that fundamentally, I can do anything and you have no fundamental rights. Am I hearing this right? Or have I got it totally wrong?
No, you're hearing this absolutely right. Rajiv Dhawan, who's, one of the famous lawyers and senior counsel at the Supreme Court, called this India's constitutional dustbin. I have called this India's constitutional backdoor, which is, anytime you need to do something and you can't do it front and center, you kind of let it through the back door. And this is not just limited to the 9th schedule. It's everything. I mean, every time, I showed in one of the opening chapters of my dissertation that to implement 5-year plans, the constitution was amended 14 times in the, 3 decades of socialism that India attempted, just to implement 5-year plans. I'm talking about Essential Commodities Act. I'm talking about land reform. I'm talking about nationalization, and sometimes they don't just affect fundamental rights. The Essential Commodities Act really hurts federalism because you are centralizing the market price system with the union government, right? You're really hurting federalism. The 9th schedule is not just hurting, property rights or fundamental rights. It is hurting separation of powers. You're telling the judiciary that I will prevent your jurisdiction from actually purviewing a particular area where people's rights are affected. Right? So you're absolutely right. It's not a minor issue. It's a really serious issue. But this is how we've conducted our constitutional jurisprudence over 75 years.
So the Constitution is at conflict with itself?
The Constitution is at conflict with itself is one way of putting it. There are certain parts of the Constitution which can be quite incompatible. For those of you who are sort of constitutional nerds, there's been a raging battle going on in India between fundamental rights and directive principles. I'll give you a simple example of that. So directive principles of state policy, if all of us remember from our civics textbook, they are supposed to be directions that the Constitution gives to various state governments, and they are supposed to implement this. And it's all sorts of things. It's things from, we need to protect architecture of India and the heritage of India to we need to, take steps towards banning cow slaughter. That is one of the directive principles, protecting labor and ensuring equity. This is one of the directive principles. So let me take something like the cow slaughter ban. Right now, this has been highly politicized. It's become a religious issue between Hindus versus Muslims. I want to leave all that aside for a second. Okay. There are 2 serious issues here. One is cow slaughter ban prevents us from expressing ourselves, the freedom of expression, which is what we eat, right? That's one part of it. The other part of it is cow slaughter ban also prevents people from pursuing their own trade or business or occupation, which is 19(1)(g). This is a protection granted by the Constitution. So if you prevent cow slaughter ban, then there are going to be people who are relying on that industry. This is not just butchers, it's the entire tanning industry. There's a leather industry. And, we've kind of snuck in these things through directive principles to give priority to a particular group of people and their values, when in fact it is in direct conflict with the rights of people under Article 19(1)(g), right? I'll give you another example. Which is, if you think about the economic control, distribution of resources equitably across society. Now, if we say distribution of resources equitably, we mean giving power to the government to choose who gets what. Now, under Mrs. Gandhi's time, this is a pre-emergency. One of the things she did under the socialist economy was she restricted the import of newsprint. Okay, newsprint is the paper that newspapers are printed on. Okay, now India used to import this, and we were a closed economy, or mostly closed economy. So the government can put restrictions on newsprint, and one of the things she did was, now the limited amount of newsprint, the market is not going to coordinate, right? So the government says who gets how much newsprint. She restricted the largest newspapers the most. Right. And the reason she did that, ostensibly is for, distribution of equitable resources. But the real reason is they are the ones who are going to lose the most ad revenue. Right. It's the way to really hurt newspapers. Now, this might seem like an equitable distribution of resources to one person, but to me, it is a direct attack on 19(1)(a), right, which is freedom of expression. Right? Freedom of press. And that's exactly how the Supreme Court of India also read it. So, you can read the court cases on Sakal Papers or Bennett Coleman. This is exactly what is at stake, the government trying to direct resources. So you're absolutely right in the core point that there are certain aspects of the Constitution which can contradict each other. And this has been a battle that the, Indian Supreme Court has been sort of witness to, and itself grappling with how to make this, a sensible thing by not compromising, directive principles, but at the same time upholding fundamental rights. My own view is it's not radical. It's quite simple, actually, that it can't be done. Right. And we need to give priority to fundamental rights, that all these things can't be done. And if only we understood the market process just a little bit better, if we really thought about it a little bit more keenly, then we would understand that some of the goals and directive principles can be achieved a little bit differently than this kind of state command and control, or, central planning or something like that the Indian government actually tried to do.
And Shruti, on that note, I think it's, let's dig a little deeper into two fundamental and related elements, the market system and the pricing system. And of course, we have to ask you because you're such a wonderful teacher. And I think it'll be great for people, listeners, to actually understand, how do markets work? How does the pricing system do the job?
This is a great question. We think of this market either in a physical manifestation, like, you go to the marketplace, APMC Mandi, something like that. Or we think of the market as an ideological structure, right? Like versus government, or we think of markets as capitalism, and you immediately see Warren Buffett's face or something like that. Actually, it's neither. Market is invisible social cooperation. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. One of the, books that I've been very excited about, and I know Rajesh is very excited about this book, as is his son. This is I, the Pencil by Leonard Read, right? It's a really simple story. Leonard Read makes an incredible claim, a simple pencil, not one of your fancy, lead pencils, pre-liberalization, simple Natraj pencil, okay? The red and black one, that's what I'm talking about. So that pencil, how does it get made, right? And Leonard Read's point was, there is no single person in the world who knows how to make this pencil. And the first time I saw that, I said, this is an extraordinary claim. That's just ridiculous. You give me the ingredients, I can make the pencil. Yeah, obviously. But what he was saying was about 5 layers deeper. And the moment I read it, I said, oh my God, this is the entire marketplace. So what Leonard Read said is, to make this pencil, first you need to get the wood. Just look at the pencil. There's some wood involved. How do you get the wood? You need to go to a forest, right? Okay, so you need some transportation, right? You need an axe to cut the wood, or if you're in a developed economy, you need a chainsaw or something like that. Okay, so how do you make an axe? You need to go to a blacksmith, he's going to make you an axe, right? How does he get the iron to make the axe? Oh, now we are getting into iron ore and mining, right? To get into the iron ore and mining, how did we do that? You need to be able to get, some kind of blast, which means you need, some explosives. How did we get the explosives? You need some knowledge of chemical structures, and so on and so forth. And we are still at the point of cutting the wood, right? That's where we are. Now let's talk about what's inside, right? So people say it's a lead pencil. Actually, what's inside is not lead, it's graphite, right? Now, where do we get graphite? Graphite is in mines, I think. I'm not a very scientific person, but I think it comes from mines. I think there are these mines in Sri Lanka and South America and China where graphite comes from. I don't even know this. I've used a pencil my whole life, which is kind of the point, right? Now, you need to know how to mine graphite, right? Then you need to know how to put all this together. I can barely sharpen my pencil without breaking a lead. But the incredible thing about the market process is that this pencil gets made, right? It requires the cooperation of thousands of people across different countries who need different kinds of knowledge. Some of the processes take 2 minutes, right? Such as, shaving of the wood. Some of the processes take months, like mining graphite. All of this comes together magically in the form of a pencil without any one person directing that pencil should be made. This is the magic of Leonard Reed's story. Now, there are two further points I want to make in this, which are also there in Leonard Reed's story. One is, I don't know how much a Natraj pencil costs these days. Those years it used to be about 1 rupee, one pencil when I was young. So let's say, I don't know, it's 20 rupees per pencil these days, right? For a mere 20 rupees, I can buy the world's social cooperation. That's magic to me. Right? I didn't have to know any of these activities. I didn't even have to know that it's graphite and not lead. Right? I didn't have to know anything except the fact that I need a pencil and that I have the money, and I would rather have the pencil than the money. That's all I needed to know. And I magically get access to the whole world's knowledge, not just in the present moment, but all past moments. Right? Metallurgy that was done 400 years ago, I can benefit from that today, and I don't need to know any of it. Right? If a Sri Lankan mine closes, again, when I was growing up, there was a huge civil war going on in Sri Lanka. My pencil supply didn't stop, right? I'm guessing that the market process just readjusted where the graphite came from. I'm guessing they moved to South America or China or somewhere else to get their graphite. But I didn't even have to know about this. I didn't have to know that I need to readjust my claims, readjust my desires and my needs. I just needed to be able to go to the marketplace and consensually buy a pencil. That's all I needed to do. So that's the second point, right? That I can buy this social cooperation. The third point is no one is directing this, right? No one is telling the woodcutter that the wood needs to go to make pencils as opposed to go and burn a fire, right? No one is telling people in graphite mines that this graphite needs to go into pencils, right? No one is telling Natraj Pencils, which I think is a privately owned company, how many pencils they need to make. No one's telling them that, right? And magically, all the people who need pencils get pencils, right? I have never experienced a pencil shortage in my life. I've experienced multiple other shortages. I've lived through a pandemic right now. I've experienced a toilet paper shortage in the world's richest country, right? I've experienced many shortages. I've never experienced a pencil shortage, even in socialist India, right? And so there is a magic behind the market. And that magic is that it can bring together millions of people's cooperation at a moment in time and across time, all the knowledge that they have inbuilt in them, and it can put it together in a place, and it can direct those resources to the people who value them the most. That to me is the market, right? I remember when I was living in New York City, everything is the city that never sleeps and things like that. And again, pre-liberalization baby. So I had not had a kiwi, until I was about 10 or 12 years old. Kiwi, the fruit, wasn't available in India. It's a New Zealand fruit. We were not rich. Middle class people didn't have kiwis, whatever. So I only ate it once I went abroad. And I love kiwis. So there's a place called West Side Market, West Side Grocery Market. It's different points on the west side of Manhattan where I used to live. And I remember I called them one day and I said, what are your store hours? And they said, ma'am, we're open 24/7, 365. And I said, today is Thanksgiving. What are your store hours? And she said, what part of 24/7, 365 do you not understand? I said, you're really open on Thanksgiving and Christmas? She said, yeah, we're open. I mean, on Christmas, we close at 10 p.m. on Christmas Eve, but we're open at 6 next morning. Don't worry. I said, okay, let me test this out. So one of the days when I was writing my dissertation and I was up really late, I went to the grocery store and I bought one kiwi. That's it. I just wanted to see if I could do this. And now just think about that kiwi. I mean, I've never been to New Zealand. It's literally the other end of the world from where I am in New York City. And the ability to go and buy a perfectly ripe kiwi for me to eat without having any sense of who made this kiwi, who grew it. No one knew. I wanted to come in at 2 a.m. and buy the kiwi. The fact that this works to me is magic. And I think that magic of the market is not money. People keep misunderstanding that it's money. It's cooperation, right? It is people I never knew, who don't know me, who don't know what I like and what I need, magically make available everything that I want in that moment in time. Right? And only people who've grown up in socialism realize that this is magic, because we've seen when that's not available.
And that coordination, Shruti, comes across because of prices.
Absolutely. So when the prices are allowed to function naturally, markets coordinate beautifully, right? So now there are two aspects about price. Now, price, people think, is the sticker that is on a particular product, right? That's only the final manifestation of it, right? The price is whatever the market dictates the price is. And anyone who has experienced shortages, knows that. Again, I probably, I know half of India is below 25 years of age, right? So they've never bought a movie ticket in black. Okay. I have bought a movie ticket in black, right? So it's one of those things where you immediately know what the regular price or the sticker price is, right? But at that price, the good is not available. And you know what the market price is, which is probably twice as much or 1.7 times that or something, right? So we all need to understand how this market price comes about, right? When do prices increase? When do they decrease? When are they different from sticker prices? Now, market prices are not always increasing because of coordination. A lot of people think that if we didn't have controls, market prices would keep increasing. It's not true. They also decrease, right? All these young people, half of India below 25, you go to happy hour, right? At 5 in the evening, you get 2 beers for the price of one. At 7:30 in the evening, you get 1 beer for the price of one. It's simple, right? Within the same day, within a few hours, you can see the price naturally change. Now, why is it that at 4 in the evening or 5 in the evening, you can get 2 beers for the price of one? Because most people don't start drinking that early, right? They're probably at work, they're probably in traffic, they're probably at school or tuitions or college, and they're probably going to have a drink only later in the day, right? And that's when there's a lot of crowd. So the price is the way to coordinate and make sure that we can kind of smooth out the restaurant hours in a way that we're not super busy after 7. We also have some people coming in at 5. So without interventions, prices can also decrease, right? And without intervention, absolutely prices can increase. And the only thing that signals is that there are lots of other people who want what you want. That's it, right? So very often when the prices are high, people complain about the producer, right? I always tell my students, don't complain to the person who's selling the good, complain to all the other people who are buying the good. They are the ones who are driving the price up, right? And the price is just a simple way of ensuring that the people who value it the most get it. Like an Uber during surge prices, right? When the price goes up in surge, then it means that there are enough Ubers for people who need it the most, right? And by need, we're talking about people who are willing to put their money to what their need is, not just cheap talk of, oh, I really wish I had an Uber, right? And the moment the price increases, 2 things happen. One, there are some people who walk away from buying the good. They say, okay, this is too costly. I can't buy the movie in black. Main kal dekh lunga. Yeah, main kal dekh lungi, right? So that's one group. The other is more sellers are forthcoming. Now, this is not true in a movie ticket hall because, the number of tickets are fixed for that given show. But in an Uber, now suddenly Uber drivers see that, hey, it's surge price going on. So I shouldn't be watching Game of Thrones or playing video games on my phone. I'm going to make more money by supplying my services in the Uber market. And then they join the market, right? So what the price system does is it just coordinates behavior. It matches people who need something with the people who are willing to supply it, right? This is that simple. I'll give you the simplest example of there is no such thing as a buyer and seller, okay? Everyone flips. It's a matter of coordination. Think of a concert that you have been dying to go to, right? Or a sports like an IPL match or something. I'm talking pre-COVID times and hopefully one day in the future, right? You buy these tickets and it's amazing. And you're a huge fan of, whatever, Delhi Daredevils or whoever is playing. And you realize that there are other people who are so excited about the same match that they're willing to offer you 5,000 rupees for the ticket for which you paid 1,000 rupees. Suddenly you might become a seller. You might say, you know what? I'd rather have the additional 4,000 rupees and watch the match at home, where it's nice and I can get a cold beer as opposed to, giving up that 4,000 rupees. So there are times when for any particular good, we think of buyers and sellers as, as completely different beings from like Mars versus Jupiter or something like that. That's not the case. We're all buyers and we're all sellers. And sometimes we just sell our services, right? And in this case, throughout this talk, though none of us are making money of it, but I sell, few minutes or a few hours of economics to buy my Natraj pencils. That's really what I'm doing. Right. And one day, if I become better at making pencils than at delivering economics lectures, then I promise you, I will be the one selling Rajagopalan pencils, not Natraj pencils. So we all can change. We can all do the different things that needs to be done at a given point in time. It is the price that gives us two things. It gives us the information of what is wanted in the market. Right. That's one thing that it's telling us. And the second, it gives us the incentive to respond. Right? So if the prices go up suddenly, I have information that, hey, there's a shortage of something, right? Like toilet paper in the United States, there's a shortage. So I should be responsible, but that's not enough. Information is not enough to make people act responsibly all the time, right? The incentive it's giving me is, now it costs too much to buy toilet paper. Let's just buy as much as we need. And we can come back later and we can pick up more. Or let me try and find substitutes for toilet paper, like a bidet or something like that, right? So it makes me act responsibly. So Tyler Cowen and Alex Tabrock have a beautiful sentence in their principles textbook. They say the price is a signal wrapped in an incentive, right? And that's, I think, a beautiful, beautiful line. And that's the coordinating mechanism of the price system. It tells us what to do and it gives us the, incentive to do it in a way that we are socially cooperative and we do what is best for resources, not just for us, but for everyone around us.
So, Shruti, that's pretty interesting. And I do get it. But what I didn't get, constitution leading up to markets and pricing, you said something like that. These two need to be connected in my head. And I am getting some vague ideas on how it's going to get connected, but we're going to let you try and connect economics and law, because it's not often that we get a hippoBrain at two things.
So I'll talk about a couple of different markets, okay, and how government interventions can really impede markets. And the Indian Constitution is a great place to do that. So, in India, we have lots and lots of farmers and agriculture is very unproductive, right? So wherever you go in India, you talk to farmers are dying to get out of agriculture. You talk to any farmer, they don't want their son or daughters to be farmers. They want their sons and daughters to get a government job or become economics professors or something else, because they realize it's backbreaking, very unproductive. Okay, fair enough. So we know that farmers want to exit. They're not able to exit. Now you wonder why. Why are there so many farmers who want to leave agriculture and they're not able to leave agriculture? So you go and talk to them. They say, we can't sell our agricultural land. Okay, that's really strange. In India, I grew up in New Delhi, I grew up in the boom years of Gurgaon becoming big. Every developer in India wants to buy land. Apparently, every farmer in India wants to sell land. What is the problem? I just can't understand what's going on. So you start digging a little bit deeper. And then I realized that the government has various laws. This is state level government, right? So different states have laws that prevent farmers from selling their agricultural land to non-farmers. Okay, I'm going to give some background to this. This comes a little bit from the whole East India Company land grab and then, terrible behavior by zamindars and their, oppressive tax system. So where this comes from, they thought that, farming is so prone to ups and downs because of the weather, right? And because of floods and droughts and things like that. So we need to protect farmers. And one of the worst things that happens with farming is when you have a bad harvest, you might be forced to sell your land in a fire sale, so that you can feed your family and things like that. So we don't want that to happen. So we will limit only farmers buying farmers' land so that there is no situation of this, crazy fire sale. So it's a very well-intentioned law. They didn't just come up with it from nowhere. Now, the problem is it actually really hurts the farmers, because you and I know that the larger the market, the thicker the market, the better price you can get for your land, right? Or the better price the land will be. Now, if you say only farmers can buy your land, then you have cut out most people interested in buying your land from bidding for your land, which means you've instantly depressed the price of land. right? Now, if a developer like say DLF, who developed a lot of land in Delhi and the outskirts of Delhi, for them to buy land, they can't buy agricultural land. Why? Because the government also doesn't permit us to do non-agricultural use on agricultural land. So what do? They have to buy the land, go to the government, get a change of land use certificate, and then that land, you can build a mall or a golf course or whatever. The moment you've bought the land from a farmer and you've got the change of land use certificate, the value of that land is 40 times the value of the land if the farmer sold to another farmer for agricultural use, right? So now you've created dual markets for land, right? And the worst thing you created is political unrest, because farmers are like, what is this nonsense? I can't just sell my land to anyone. When I try and sell my land, I get pittance for it. You guys get together, you government people with your cronies and I don't want to badmouth DLF. I'm sure every real estate developer in India is doing the same thing. You get together with them, you get them their, single window clearance and change of land use certificate, and the value is 40x. So we will hold out and we will not sell our land, right? So it's really bizarre where government interventions have created a situation from the farmers dying to sell their land to the farmers protesting and saying, we will not sell our land. But actually, the point is not about land sale, it's about price. You've created dual markets for land, and now the farmer is going to get the bad price, right? Now, all this is happening at the politics level, right? Again, one of the first columns I ever wrote was on the Tata Nano factory that they were trying to set up in Singur in West Bengal. I'm really dating myself in this conversation now. Everyone knows when I was born and when I went to college. But that was what was going on. And I wrote about it and I said, this is terrible. Now, we're taking land from poor farmers and giving it to rich developers. How the hell did we get here? I opened the Constitution. It is the same rules that allowed us to take farmers from zamindars and give it to poor farmers. We weakened the Constitution to enable that, which means today the Constitution is weak and we can take land from poor farmers and give it to Tata Nano. We can take land from poor farmers and we can give it to DLF or whoever the group is. So my problem was, I said, this is not just about politics. And this is not just about ideology of development versus, should we have a Tata Nano factory or should we have farming? It's about something much bigger than that. It is about how are we governing ourselves, right? What is the governing document that allows the government to do all these things? And then I got into the Constitution and I said, it is the Constitution that allows, because we have weak enforcement of the right to property, right? And there are two aspects to the right to property. One is the right to regulate property, the government's authority to regulate property. This is 19(1)(f). And the other is the government's ability to take property and give compensation, which is Article 31G, right? So it's this 19(1)(f) which allows the state governments to impose restrictions on selling agricultural land or selling land to someone outside the state or selling land to a non-farmer and things like that, which depresses prices. Why did this happen? The courts did not correctly enforce Article 19, right? Why are we able to take land from people in Singur and give it to Tata Nano? Because the courts and, overall, because of things like the 9th schedule and various amendments to the Constitution, we weakened Article 31 to such an extent that now the government can pretty much take land from anyone and give it to anyone, right? Without paying appropriate compensation. So these are the sorts of things that I started thinking about. And I said, what seems like a matter of simple land prices, right? What seems like a matter of simple, farmers protesting against developers, that's what it looks like. But what it actually is that we've given our government too much power to restrict natural cooperation and transactions. And a consequence of that is we've given the government too much power to pick winners and losers. Now the government gets to pick, what is going to be made somewhere. Is it going to be a special economic zone for Tata Nano, or is it going to be, rice farming or jute farming in West Bengal? So that's how I got to that idea. And I started really picking at the way, the constitutional framework or the infrastructure that we got in 1950 slowly got corrupted such that all these different kinds of, central planning mechanisms could be put in place. The Essential Commodities Act, it's the same thing, right? It regulates prices of various, farm and non-farm items. Why should the government be in the business of regulating any of this, right? We know that the price system naturally, leads resources to the highest valued use at a particular point in time. We also talked about how the price system encourages people on the demand side to act more responsibly and encourages people on the supply side to increase their supply swiftly, right? It's only a misunderstanding of the market system that leads people to say, oh, we would rather have the Essential Commodities Act. And then when you start looking at who wants the Essential Commodities Act, middlemen. All your APMCs and ration shops, all these politically connected people who've gotten licenses, paid lots of money and they've gotten licenses. They've all cartelized, right? And they have all these restrictions on who people can buy and sell from. They are the only people benefiting from this. Because the person who really wants onions can't get onions. And the person who really wants to sell onions, their onion produce is, their lorries are overturned if you don't sell it at the APMC Mandi. So this is, constantly going on. You see it happening in pharmaceuticals. You see this happening in, agricultural produce. You see this happening pretty much everywhere in the Indian economy. And that, I think, is because we have not protected economic rights appropriately with the constitution. The original constitution tried to protect it, but we weakened all the economic rights in the process of implementing central planning. So to me, if we need to understand markets in India and why markets are not functional in India, one then needs to go to the regulatory and the statutory level. And then eventually you need to understand the constitutional level. Otherwise, the whole thing is going to make no sense, right? Otherwise, you're just studying, APMC rules out of nowhere. And you're like, why the hell did this come about? How the hell could they do this? Right? And that's kind of, how this whole thing started for me. Sorry, that's a really long-winded answer to how I came to these things. But I really wanted to understand what was going on.
Right. It's a wonderful sort of background that I think for people. I mean, these are things which one doesn't ordinarily learn in economics classes or in a regular work, but we all interact in the market every day. 99% of our lives are voluntary transactions, which are being done between a buyer and seller. It's only when the government intervenes that there is this problem. And if I were to sort of extrapolate on what you're saying, Shruti, it is that if India is going to sort of fast track its path to prosperity, I think we need as little government intervention or messing around with the pricing system and markets. Just let people be, and they will, and that's what's led to prosperity in many parts of the world.
Absolutely. I don't want to make an ideological point here. So there is room for government in society. I mean, of course there is. We need the government to provide law and order. We need the government to, maintain some basic security. We need the government to provide public goods. And, I will even concede that, there are certain non-public goods that we can have the government provide, such as having a good public education system or, healthcare infrastructure that we see in many other countries. The nature of that, can be up for debate. But I absolutely, don't question the role of government, especially in the night watchman sense of providing the infrastructure within which people can feel safe and exchange. But when it comes specifically to your point, Rajesh, which is the government intervening in the market process and setting prices, that is just a recipe for disaster. And we have seen it over and over and over again. Anytime pre-liberalization, the government set the price for something, immediately there were massive shortages. Nobody could get the good. And the only way to acquire the good was, through some political connection or to import it. And it made criminals out of ordinary people. All of us overnight became black marketeers and smugglers when the only thing that, we really wanted was to get a new Walkman or to get a new pair of sneakers or to get more sugar than what the ration card quota permitted us during Diwali. It really turned ordinary people into criminals. And I think there's a really big problem with that. There are two elements to that. One is the unintended consequences, right? You set the price. There's a host of unintended consequences. One, there is no reason for individuals to now regulate their own behavior, right? Now, if the price is so low, then I have no reason to drop out of the market or say, hey, I only need so much toilet paper. Let me not take more than I need, and so on, right? So that's one part of it. The second part of it is you completely kill the incentives of the sellers. Right? Normally, when there's a shortage of something, people are forthcoming and they say, hey, there's a way to make a buck here. And I should, try and find a way by which I can profit while serving someone else's need and make some money. if you have price controls, it completely kills the incentive for sellers to be forthcoming, right? And the third, and I think this is the worst unintended consequence of what has happened in India, it creates an entire crop of people who are middlemen, right? So there are various words for them. Some of them are very rude in local Indian languages, but we basically have, like an entire cadre of middlemen in India or fixers, and all they are doing is trying to help individuals navigate a market that is so tightly controlled by the government, and they are getting the biggest gains, right? So this is everyone from people who are circumventing APMC to your essential commodities, to people who are supplying things to pharmacies without prescriptions, and then it goes further and further up, and then you eventually get to a point of huge ghaplas and corruption scandals when it comes to mining and 2G and all. So it runs all the way. We've just created a parallel system of middlemen. And those middlemen are now preventing any kind of reform, and they make it very difficult to exit this crony system and go into a more coordinated and fair market system. So I think that's been the worst unintended consequence of that. But even more generally, I mean, forget the unintended consequences. That's a consequentialist argument. I think we need to fundamentally ask ourselves, what business do a few government bureaucrats have in regulating our lives? Why must they have that power, right? So our arguments, Rajesh and I so far have been arguing that they shouldn't have that power because they do it very badly and the consequences are very poor, right? But even if that wasn't the case, why should these people have power over our lives? Why should they decide what the, farmers behind can sell their produce to me or you at, right? It is simply none of their business. There are very few areas where, people might create an externality like, crop burning that happens in Punjab, which pollutes like, the northwest belt for about 10 or 15 days. There are very few instances that I can think of where the behavior of farmers is actually posing a lot of damage to other people, right? And it is most certainly not done by charging a high price for tomatoes or rice. It is usually because they are burning crops or, they're using, they might be using some kind of fertilizer, which is very harmful. And we don't yet know the effects of that fertilizer, or something that's not been tested appropriately. That is about the only types of things I can imagine where we might need government standards or government rules. The price system intervention of the government, it just takes away people's freedom. I can't understand why, as a society, Indians would be interested in living like slaves to bureaucrats, which is what we've become. We are slaves to our bureaucracy.
It's a great point, Shruti. And I think this has been a fascinating sort of not just economics 101, but it's life 101. It's how we live, how we behave. I think that's what you've sort of explained, probably help people think also on their own actions and what their core beliefs are. And as we look at sort of near the end, I want to ask you about another passion of yours now, which you're sort of working on, which is social entrepreneurship and emergent ventures. So tell us a little about that.
Yeah, before I jump to emergent ventures, I want to talk about social entrepreneurship and actually even economic entrepreneurship for a second. Sure. We have entrepreneurship in all these different boxes, right? Social entrepreneurship versus market entrepreneurship versus political entrepreneurship. But what are entrepreneurs? They are people who find a way of solving a problem that other people have not yet solved. Right? I mean, Rajesh has been entrepreneurial his entire career. He has solved many, many problems for many, many people. He's made lots and lots of people better off in the process, right? Now, all three of us are entrepreneurs in the sense that we see a huge gap in the discourse in India because of broadcast licensing and terrible rules like that. The TV channel discourse, the radio discourse is either Bollywood and Saas Bahu, or it's just screaming, TV news anchors. So we have found a gap. We are being entrepreneurial and we are supplying quality podcasts and quality content. So entrepreneurship is around us. It's just everywhere, right? Now we try and box it in different ways, but the reason entrepreneurship is everywhere is whether you have a socialist economy, have a capital, whatever kind of economy you have, people have a fundamental entrepreneurial spirit. It's very pro-social behavior, right? We want to cooperate with other people. We want to solve other people's problems. And in the process, of course, the fundamental assumptions that we want to do what is good for ourselves, right? So all entrepreneurship in a sense in India is welcome. And when people ask me what makes me, bullish or hopeful about India, because so much of my research just points out problems and, is tinged with hopelessness, it is when I see the entrepreneurs today. It's just incredible to see the kinds of ideas that come from India, right? It's like, V.S. Naipaul's may there be a million mutinies, so just like the more entrepreneurial ideas that come from India, the better. Now, what we find in India very often is because of all these terrible kinds of rules, we've completely thwarted entrepreneurship in the manufacturing sector. Right? And if there is entrepreneurship in the manufacturing sector, it's happening in the shadows. It's happening in the informal sector. Once it reaches a particular scale and it needs to formalize, it becomes too costly. So people just stay in the informal sector, right? This is everyone from the lady who stitches my salwar kameez when I go back to India, who's doing it off the books in one little room in her flat, to the people we buy, leather bags from in Dharavi in Bombay. I mean, every kind of thing that we can think of, we're doing it in the informal sector. They are all entrepreneurs. Okay. Now, a particular kind of entrepreneurship that I am very interested in is moonshot ventures, right? So some entrepreneurship, if you just look at the regular literature, like if you read Israel Kirzner or someone, for him, entrepreneurs are engaging in arbitrage, right? Your standard buy low, sell high, you make the buck, right? So that is also entrepreneurship. And that entrepreneurship is so valuable to the market process. It gets the pencil made, it gets the onion produced, right? It does all of those magical things. But the moonshot venture entrepreneurship, that's slightly different in the sense that it has very low probability of succeeding. But should it succeed, it could change the world. Right? The payoff is really, really big. And according to me, the standard, market process in India, whether it works through angel investors, friends and family, venture capital, all of that, is much more interested in entrepreneurship on the margin, which is making small improvements than the moonshot ventures, simply because, people have portfolio and they have a risk profile and they don't want to put in a lot of money in an enormously risky venture and 99% it's going to fail. Now this brings me to emerging ventures. Now Tyler Cowen, who's the head of Mercatus Center and an economics professor at George Mason University, and writes Marginal Revolution, the blog, which I recommend all the readers read. He writes that with Alex Tabarrok. He came up with the idea of emerging ventures, where he said that we're going to support crazy moonshot ideas. Okay. And what we mean by crazy is not that the idea needs to be crazy. It's simply that these are the kinds of ideas that usually slip under the radar, right? People who are doing standard venture capital and things like that are not that interested in them, either because it's very early stage or because the idea is too radical or it has very low chances of success. Should we support these ideas, even if some of them, very few of them succeed, there is a potential that they might change the world. And that's what I'm trying to do with Emergent Ventures. So we got a special tranche of money. We got a small grant to run Emergent Ventures India. So I direct the India applications, and we've had some incredible applications. Sometimes it is for something, we've had students who are, first, most of our emergent ventures, the average age of the winner is very, very low, right? So we have students who are still in school. We have students who've dropped out of college. They're developing something, they're coding, they're creating an app. So Mahakavach, which was one of the COVID apps that was used by the Nashik municipality, and then eventually, I think even the Bombay municipality used it. That was made by one of the emergent ventures winners who just wanted to respond to the COVID crisis by saying, we need to make a good contact tracing app, and we need to make it open source, and we need to help the government, right? Now, this is not the kind of thing that would have been that quickly funded by the marketplace, right? And it does two things. It not just gets like a COVID app or tracker made very quickly, it also supports a very young entrepreneur, in this case, Nilay Kulkarni, who has gone on, who will hopefully go on to do amazing things, in his life trajectory. Another one, this is actually a regular company, it's called Infinite Analytics, Akash Bhatia and Puru Botla, they run an incredible consumer research firm. They kind of gave up all their commercial activities and dedicated themselves to COVID, and they were looking at aggregated mobility data, and they actually helped various municipalities help in understanding how people move. So they actually worked with the BMC, the municipality in Bombay, to figure out how people are locationally moving in Dharavi such that they could correctly assign containment zones. Because the original assignment of containment zones, there were people living in one zone, but there are about 400 people who use one restroom in Dharavi. So, the people were living in one zone, but they were buying milk in another zone, or they were going to a restroom in another zone. And they figured that, that's what's going on. People are not violating the rules. We've just zoned it incorrectly. And then they redid the zones. And, Dharavi has been one of the few success stories. And this is, again, an, incredible example of how an emerging ventures grantee managed to use all their skills, the technology at their disposal. We just gave them a few funds to do this, and they managed. And preventing an outbreak in Dharavi is preventing an outbreak in Mumbai. Dharavi serves all of Mumbai, right? So there is that core to it. And the most recent grant that I gave, these kids are incredible. Someone is producing. The company is called Pran. And this is Angad. He's amazing. He grew up asthmatic, and he wanted to solve this problem of poor quality air, and air pollution, as we know, creates massive, imposes massive costs on productivity, loss of productivity, morbidity, illness in India, even mortality. And so he thought he's going to create an air purifier which functions outdoors. So we all know about indoor air purifiers. He's created an incredible outdoor air purifier. And, just so thrilled to find these young people to help them along the journey. I have no question that, they will eventually become big. And I know I keep telling everyone that all these, venture capitalists and angel investors are going to fight to invest in my emerging ventures grantees eventually. But we are so thrilled that when they are so young and so excited about changing the world, they come to us, and we don't ask them to give us a deck presentation and tell us their chances of success or some nonsense like that. We just really like them. We really like their idea. We invest in it. And I'm very grateful that I have a mentor, like Tyler, who started Emergent Ventures, who told me at the very beginning, if a lot of your projects are not failing, you're doing something wrong, and that's the sort of attitude that we have towards social entrepreneurship and innovation.
Wow. Shruti, that was brilliant. And I think we don't have much time, though I wish we had much more time. I think we're come to our close. Rajesh, any last words from you to try and summarize what Shruti had to say?
I think it's been an amazing hour listening to Shruti. I think we can go on, and I love conversations with her, like I said in the beginning. But I hope one couple of things that people take away, I think, is the power of how markets work. Okay, pricing. Please think 10 times before you ask for a government intervention on price caps or any sort of government intervention. I think the negative elements of that are going to be very, very significant. And I think the root cause analysis, like we keep saying in business, I think if you have a problem here, it's probably very likely to have its origins in the constitution. Maybe I'm a little extra biased, but when you go back to the roots, the rules of a country are set in there. I think Shruti took us all over. And I think after today, I think people are going to see their pencils very differently.
Absolutely. When I see a pencil, I see magic. And, I know that the magic these days is apparently in the coolest phone and things like that. But those are just the pencil magnified in terms of social cooperation, division of labor, and division of knowledge. So it's a wonder that we can do this on the internet, during a pandemic, that we're just magically able to communicate in this way. And I think a lot of that comes because of the magic of the market. My only complaint, Rajesh, is this time I did most of the talking and I didn't get to learn as much from you as I normally do. But it was so great to speak with both of you. This was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Shruti. I think it's been an amazing conversation. I learned a lot, and the ability to actually know what is very interesting. So one would normally have understood that markets work in a certain way, prices work in a certain way, and there are forces that act upon each other. And largely, most people would agree, get out of the way, let it fix through. Of course, there will be short-term implications at that time. You want government, but I think what is very interesting is what you and Rajesh said, that, okay, whenever you say you want government, wait, hold on. There are issues and there are complexities to it. And what I found extremely interesting is that when you actually goes back to the rule book. And it goes back to the rule book that keeps changing. I know if everybody plays a game, they probably realize that if a rule book keeps changing all the time, it's now become just way too complicated. People just get like, what was the damn rules? And if you allow a lot of things in, which I didn't realize that the 9th schedule seems to be that little bit of a black hole into all our prosperity seems to have been sucked in, because now where you've come in and said constitution is what is stopping a lot of these things to come in, while the constitution seems to have been built in good faith and liberal policies and the thinking was right. But if you, me allowed our politicians, because we wanted the intervention, and we allowed our politicians to keep fiddling. I think these consequences are larger. And today I've understood that in great detail. And I think it requires an economist with a law degree and a PhD in Indian constitution. This is the perfect storm, Shruti. And thanks a lot. And I
Thank you so much. You're very kind.
From invisible social cooperation, the constitution seems to have created a visible central directive. And I think that's the problem that we face. So one last thing, hippoBrain is free. So whenever Shruti talks about pricing and she talks about a signal wrapped in an incentive, and we are giving this out free. It is a great signal wrapped in an amazing incentive. That incentive is you. Please listen, please subscribe, please press the bell icon, please like it if you really like it, and give us feedback, put in your comments. Thanks a lot. You've been a great audience, Shruti. You've been an outstanding lecturer, constitution expert, lawyer, and economist. Thank you all.